I'll be recapping a Korean drama called The Killing Vote. It starts with a hooded man stabbing someone to death. A police arrives and holds him at gunpoint, but the hooded man doesn't care and keeps stabbing. 8 years later, we see a woman dancing in front of a webcam in an illegal underground streaming. Detective Moo Chan, the same police in the opening scene, is also watching her and uses the woman's clues to find their location. Without waiting for reinforcements, he bursts in and takes down all the men. While looking for the business owner, Detective goes into another room and starts planting evidence. The dancing woman, who we now know as Hyun from the cybercrime department, catches him and records his doings. He notices her and takes her phone as the rest of the police arrive. Hyun confronts him about planting evidence, and he remarks that she has a reputation for whistleblowing too. Later, Detective interrogates the leader of the illegal streaming. He's not cooperative, so Detective turns off the camera and brutalizes himself, then tells the culprit that now assaulting a police will be added to his charges. The culprit realizes this policeman is crazy and complies. Elsewhere, a man accused of selling child corn, whom we'll call Corn Man, is being released early from prison. The citizens are protesting his release, and Detective arrives to escort him. While being escorted, Corn Man hurls insults at the protesters, so Detective intentionally drops him, and the protesters attack him. Inside the prison, 3 inmates discuss how Corn Man was able to get out of jail thanks to another inmate known as Professor. Hyun is fixing her sister's laptop that's been infected by a virus when she runs into a suspicious video hidden in the codes. The video has a masked man talking about the flawed state of Korea's judicial system. In Corn Man's hideout, he is releasing a new batch of corn videos immediately after being released, and he laughs about getting an early release by marrying a Russian wife while in jail. The next day, Hyun shows the video to her team leader, but he tells her the person must be an attention seeker and to ignore it. While Hyun's sister is sitting for an exam, her teacher pulls out his laptop and suspiciously texts someone called Executioner, asking if they should start. Immediately, the whole nation receives a notification on their phone. The notification is a poll asking the people to vote on whether to execute the just-released Corn Man or not. Most people don't take it seriously and undoubtedly vote yes. The police start looking for Corn Man, who is in a club surrounded by women. When he finds out about the poll, he also thinks it's a joke and orders all the women to vote yes. In the next scene, we see Corn Man tied to a chair as the masked vigilante ends his life. The next day, his body is found in his corn hideout. He died of suffocation from money being stacked down his throat. The masked vigilante releases another video and provides proof of killing Corn Man. Then he says that citizens over the age of 18 will have the chance to decide whether criminals who've evaded punishment live or die. It will happen for 1 hour on the 15th and 30th of every month, and if the yes votes exceed 50%, then the person will be killed. The police higher-ups discuss this since it's causing a stir in the nation. They note that they'll be criticized by the public whether they catch the masked vigilante or not, since a majority of the citizens think the masked vigilante is doing justice, but in law, he's still committing murder. Then one of them says he knows the perfect scapegoat for this task. They tell Detective to form a special team for the task. He figures out their plan, so negotiates that if he succeeds he should be allowed to join the headquarters investigation team. Meanwhile, Hyun's team leader asks her to pretend she never found that video on her sister's laptop, since it would imply his negligence. This pushes her to the edge, and she gives him a piece of her mind. Hyun's friend, Dan, is also included in this special team. Hyun disregards her team leader and shows Detective the video she found. She points out that a certain phrase the vigilante uses in that video is similar to something a defendant said in court 8 years ago, a case Detective was in charge of, so she thinks the defendant is the vigilante. This revelation makes Detective fall into another flashback. In the flashback, we see the defendant being talked about is the hooded man in the opening scene. He was taking revenge on the man who essayed and killed his young daughter. Cutting back to the present, the man is still in prison, and he's the professor the inmates were referring to. Detective isn't convinced Professor is the vigilante since he's still in prison and has never received any visitors. Hyun asks to be added to his team, but he refuses. In prison, we see that Professor is respected and is a positive influence for the rest of the prisoners, having helped one of them get a GED degree. However, he doesn't seem interested in discussing Corn Man's death. Meanwhile, Hyun learns that she has been accepted into the special team. Detective visits Professor, but he refuses to meet, and the prison guard privately offers to help him if he needs anything. Afterwards, Detective and Lieutenant Choi go to the club where Corn Man was last seen. After being beaten up, the waiter gives them the contacts of the taxi driver who picked up Corn Man. They talk to the taxi driver, who gives them the taxi's number plate. Unfortunately, the killer is smart and has already discarded the taxi in a junkyard, and the police are too slow to stop it from being crushed. Hyun and Dan find the IP address of where the virus on her sister's laptop originated from. They go to the address and realize it's Corn Man's hideout, and a short while later, the special team also arrives. Inside, they find a cable and Hyun copies all the data she needs from it to analyze it later. Detective decides to set up an interview for Hyun and the prisoners. Professor, getting special treatment from the warden, is excluded. However, he changes his mind when he learns that Hyun is asking everyone if they're familiar with the phrase she heard from the video. While being interrogated, Professor ignores Hyun's questions and tells her that maybe they should look for the next victims instead of the killer. The scene shifts to a woman taking her kids to school, but intentionally pushes them in front of an oncoming car. Fortunately, the car stops on time. However, she proceeds to take the kids to an alleyway and starts beating them when she's stopped by someone and is abducted. That same day is the killing vote day. The masked vigilante brings up the pictures of the just abducted woman, whom we'll call Fraud Woman. Masked vigilante explains that she killed her 3 ex-husbands with poison for insurance money and provides proof. As the people vote, Hyun and Dan locate where Fraud Woman is. They find her in a car rigged with a bomb on top of a building. Detective enters the car and realizes the bomb might go off when the voting ends, so asks his team if there's a wide-ranging area close by but far from civilians. Hyun suggests her sister's high school since it has a large sports field. Hyun also goes to the school, and after safely getting her sister to a taxi, she proceeds to the sports field. Detective and Fraud Woman are able to arrive at the field 2 minutes before the voting ends. Detective, realizing masked vigilante was listening to them the entire time, asks him what the citizens will think of him if he kills an innocent person. Then he says he won't get out of the car unless he stops the bomb. At the same time, Hyun is rushing towards the car, but it explodes beforehand. She is shocked and in tears as she watches on. Teacher watches the explosion from a distance and spots 2 students recording the whole thing. Worried about Hyun, her sister exits the taxi and sneaks into the school. While looking for Hyun, she sees teacher handing the 2 students some money in exchange for the video, and she records this exchange. As public support for masked vigilante increases, a journalist reports that an innocent police officer is critically injured because of the explosion, so asks the people to reconsider whether this masked vigilante is a hero or a criminal. At the hospital, the director of police is questioned by the press. He denounces masked vigilante and says detective is hovering in between life and death. At the explosion site, Lieutenant Choi notices teacher taking pictures of the scene and recognizes him, but teacher ignores him and walks away. Inside the hospital, we see detective is alright and only has some minor injuries. Turns out it was journalists' idea to lie to the public so that they'd change their opinion about masked vigilante being a hero. In a flashback, Hyun actually managed to pull detective away from the car before it exploded. After journalist and director of police leave, detective gets a call and is informed that, according to the autopsy, Fraud Woman was actually killed by poison and not explosion. Just then, Hyun sneaks into his room and confronts him about lying to the public. He retorts that a little lie is necessary to shift public opinion. Elsewhere, teacher sends the video he bought from the students to executioner. His mother, whom we'll call politician, arrives. She expresses her interest in masked vigilante and says she wants him on her side to win the presidential race. The next day in school, the computer of Hyun's sister isn't working, so one of her classmates, Kim, helps her. Because of this, she takes him back home to show him the video planted on her laptop, hoping he can help her decipher it. She is hoping to be a journalist someday, so she wants to catch masked vigilante too. Together, they figure out the background noise. However, Hyun catches them and goes ballistic on them for going through classified information. After a while, her anger subsides, and she joins them. She realizes that the video was recorded inside Professor's home, and her sister and Kim convince her to let them tag along. When they arrive, she tells the students to stay outside, then texts detective her whereabouts, and afterwards jumps over the wall. Inside, she finds the words, "The 13th one was wrong," painted on the wall. At that moment, someone emerges behind her and knocks her out. When detective receives the message, he creates a distraction and sneaks out. When he arrives at the house, he sees the culprit, and they get into a fight. The culprit manages to escape but bumps into Hyun's sister. She tightly hangs onto his leg, but Kim convinces her to let go, and the culprit slips away. The next morning, as the police are investigating the house, teacher secretly watches them from the next house. Detective and Hyun go to prison and question Professor about the message on the wall. Professor says it could be about how he killed his daughter's murderer. He stabbed the murderer the same number of times his daughter was stabbed and in the same manner. But the 13th one was wrong since the knife slipped in his hand. Hyun then asks him if there is someone who respected him, was close to his daughter, and could have access to such classified information. Professor says detective is the only one who fits that description, and she doesn't know what to make of it. Meanwhile, journalist gets an anonymous text, and she urgently rushes out, telling her colleagues to grab their cameras. Elsewhere, at Korn Man's funeral, his Russian wife is killed by someone. Masked Vigilante then starts a live video nationwide, exposing the police's lie that detective was seriously injured because of him, accompanying it with video proof, the same video the students recorded. The press turns up outside the prison just as detective and Hyun exit, and his unscathed face is plastered on every news screen. Detective addresses the press and issues an apology, then reminds Masked Vigilante that he's a criminal and not a hero. Teacher is watching this news from bed, accompanied by a woman. When she distracts him, he beats her up, and once he's done, he throws an expensive watch down at her. At the special team, they're all furious about detective's deceit since they were all concerned about him. Lieutenant Choi explains that he did that so as not to involve them in case it backfires. Hyun takes detective to her house because he won't be safe elsewhere now that the public is angry with him. He gets off on the wrong foot with Hyun's sister, and while arguing about the culprit who attacked Hyun in Professor's house, Hyun's sister mentions that he smelled like fireworks. This makes them suspect Masked Vigilante because explosives also smell like fireworks. Later, Hyun and detective share drinks, and he notices a scar behind her ears. She discloses that she got it from a car accident that killed her parents when she was 20. Then they decide to find the school kids who took the video of him escaping the car, and just then they receive a message about Russian wife's death. The autopsy reveals that she struggled a lot against the murderer. This leads detective to think it's a different person from the culprit who attacked Hyun, because he was clearly stronger. At school the next day, teacher watches female students playing outside through the window, and Kim notices him. The woman who was in bed with teacher goes to a shop to sell the watch he left her with. Politician arrives and slaps the woman, whom we now know is an actress. Politician smashes her watch, then gives her a slightly cheaper one. When the actress scoffs at it and threatens to reveal everything about her son, politician orders her guard to slash her face so that she never earns again using her pretty face. At school, a couple of students are bullying others and even using the killing vote method, but Hyun arrives and stands up to the bullies. One of the bullies is infuriated and goes to attack her, but Kim steps in and gets hit instead. Detective finally arrives at his special team's office and sincerely apologizes for lying to them too, and they forgive him. In the security footage of Korn Man's funeral, they notice the taxi driver was also present. Just then, Hyun gets a phone call about her sister and rushes to the hospital. At the hospital, Hyun's sister notices one of the doctors trying to take inappropriate photos of an unconscious patient. Hyun arrives and is updated about the situation, and she also meets Kim's grandmother, who's a doctor in the hospital. Grandmother seems fond of them, but when they leave, she tells Kim to stay away from Hyun and her sister because they're trouble. Hyun meets journalist and we find out she's the one who exposed Hyun as the whistleblower. Hyun confronts her about betraying the police, then asks her for Masked Vigilante's contact, but journalist denies having it. After Hyun leaves, journalist deletes the contact from her phone. Prison guard meets with detective and shows him the letters sent to professor over the past 5 years from someone called Number 1 Fan. After analyzing the letters, they notice that the death methods of the first 2 victims were recorded in the letters, confirming that they were sent by Masked Vigilante. However, there seem to be some pages missing, so they go back to prison. In the security room, Warden informs Detective that Professor has been seeing a doctor for asthma. Meanwhile, Hyun is questioning Professor about the letters, and he admits to destroying some pages. He says he'll only disclose them if they let him out of prison. Then we see him implying that the next target will be from the military, and the episode ends with Professor exiting the prison. Subscribe, like, comment, and share for more content like this. Bye.